Japa. Japa is repetition of a word or a short sentence during the practice of meditation. Letter Pa stands for that which removes or destroys all impurities and obstructions. Letter Ja stands for that which puts an end to cycle of birth and death. Therefore, Japa is an indirect means for liberation, moksha. By destroying varieties of obstructions to knowledge, Japa paves the way for liberation. Japa then is more than a mere discipline or technique. These two talks will give you an understanding of nature and logic of Japa, how it works. With this understanding, you will be able to do Japa with conviction and handle it properly. The unpredictability of thoughts. At any given time, you have only one thought. What your next thought will be anyone's guess. But when next thought does occur, it will have done so because of some logic. There is no thought without a certain connection to preceding thought. This connection may be flimsy or it may be very clear and logical, but the thought itself is never predictable. Even now, I cannot predict what I am going to say. I simply said I would talk on Japa and I started. Even the words I am saying right now were not known to me. What is going to come is unpredictable, but when it does come, it has a logic, a reason. BMW thinking. Suppose you see a BMW on the road and it draws your attention. What will your next thought be? How can he afford it? And then, a person I work with has bought a new BMW. How can he afford such an expensive car? Last year he did not even have a job. His wife must have a lot of money. I wish my wife had a rich family. When I got married, I did not think about money or my future. All these thoughts started from seeing a BMW and they follow a certain logic. This particular sequence is only one line of thinking. Let us look at another one. The German people are quite industrious. Even though their country was devastated during World War II, their economy rebounded quickly. They produce the best scientific equipment in the world. Where did we start? From BMW? What will come after BMW is anyone's guess. Even in deliberate thinking, you do not know what is coming next because thinking is always linear, one step at a time, one thought at a time. The connection between thoughts can either be logical, syntactical connection within a sentence or a simple association. But there will always be a connection, be it weak or strong. In BMW thinking, connection between thoughts is not a deliberate one. Therefore, the next thought be anything. The sky is the limit. The BMW emblem is different. It is not like the Mercedes insignia. Mercedes insignia makes to think of a star. And then your next thought will be, my astrological sign is not favorable. This movement from one thought to next is listless thinking, a meandering of thoughts in which there is no direction. Listless thinking. In listless thinking, although there is no direction, there is always some logic, some connection. It may be a simple rhyme, one word reminding you of another, or a variety of other possible connections. The one invariable is that at any given time, there is always one thought or another in your mind. In listless thinking, just as in deliberate thinking, you do not know what your next thought will be. But in Japa, you definitely know what is coming next. The japa can be a word, a short sentence, a section of a Veda, or even the whole Veda. But to be a japa, it must be something that is repeated. If you are repeating a word or short sequence, you are sure about what is supposed to come next. If something else comes, you know you are off track. In BMW thinking, however, to think of Germany and then of Mercedes or anything else is not to go off track because there is no track. Such thinking just happens. This is what is meant by listless thinking. There is no direction to it. Learning about mind. We really do not have a method to learn about our minds. We only know we are subjected to a particular type of thinking. For example, we get into reverie until something arrests our attention, and only then do we come back. Is there anything that we have in our thought life, which is our life, that helps us understand our ways of thinking? What do we have to help us learn how to direct our thinking for a given length of time and have the mind at our disposal? We have no directed technique. If we were lucky, we had some intellectual discipline in school which has given us a capacity for logical thinking. In the process, we may have discovered some discipline, but we do not know it is a technique, nor do we use it as one. Japa as a technique. Exercising one's choice is very important in japa. If I choose to mentally chant a word or sentence for a length of time, then I have a technique in hand and can see what happens in my mind. In japa, I know exactly what is to come next. If something else pops up, I know this is not what I expected, and I bring back the chosen thought. In the process, I learn how to dismiss unwanted thought and retain the one I have chosen. This is one important result of japa as a technique. As a technique, any word will work. You do not require the Lord's name or a spiritual mantra. Anything can be a mantra, like gring, gring, gring. If you keep on repeating this sound, it will work. An extraneous thought will eventually come, like what makes this kind of noise? A bagpipe may be the response. Then you may ask, what does a bagpipe have to do with my japa? By returning to the sound, the bagpipe thought is dismissed. In this way, japa works as a technique for gaining some mental discipline. However, japa is something more than the mere chanting of a sound. In repeating a given chant, you give yourself an occasion to see the ways of your own thinking. This repetition becomes a technique for keeping your mind directed for a length of time, and it can also help the mind gain a certain depth. The interval between thoughts. Advantage of repetition is we can appreciate the interval between two successive occupations of the mind. In BMW thinking, listless thinking with no direction, the mind simply moves from one thought to another. This type of thinking is like picking up noodles. If you try to pick up one noodle, you will find it coming along with a few others. Similarly, the whole occupation of thinking becomes as though a single thought, even though there are many thoughts. Between two thoughts, there is an interval. BMW is the name of a vehicle. Germany is the name of a country. Because there is a connection between the two, the interval between them is missed. Repeating a given chant eliminates or avoids connection between two thoughts, because between one chant and another there is no connection. Each chant is a complete unit in itself, and one thought is not connected to the second thought, since both are the same. Thus, between two chants, there is a period. Chant, period. Chant, period. There is no comma, no full stop. One, no, only a period, a full stop. Therefore, each chant is a complete unit, and between chants, the interval is available for you to recognize. Peace in the mind. What is it that obtains in the intervals between the chants? Between one thought with a certain form and sound and the next thought, there is no given thought. There is only an interval with no form or shape. This is what we call peace or silence. Because this silence has no particular thought form, there is no thinking as we know it. We always think peace is something we have to acquire. People even ask for it. Swamiji, I have everything except peace of mind. How can I gain this peace? Because mind is restless, we think peace is something new that we have to acquire, an attribute with which we have to embellish the mind. Is peace something we have to acquire, or is it natural? I once went to a Swami Yogi Ramaya, who was originally a yogi and then became a disciple of Ramana Maharishi. I could sense he was a person who was at peace with himself. I had committed myself to Vedanta, but at the same time, I had a lot of conflicts in my pursuit. I went to this Swami in an attempt to resolve them. He never talked much, but he said one thing to me that really hit home. For restlessness, you have to work a lot. For peace, what is there to do? Having asked this question, he became silent, which I found to be very effective. Restlessness requires a build-up. For peace, what do you have to do? For restlessness, you have to work. You have to create a build-up because without one you can never become restless. The problem is, this build-up is not something that we do consciously. It gets built up like a wall erecting itself. Suppose you have a pile of bricks and then they just resemble or assemble themselves into a wall. You'd consider it a miracle, but you do not consider a build-up of thoughts a miracle because it's always happening. It's a miracle, however, because it just happens. That it just builds itself up and you have no say over it is truly amazing. There is a helplessness in the whole process. Something triggers off a build-up. It may be a simple hormonal change, indigestion, someone's look, a frown, a change of weather, or any number of other things. Any one thing is good enough. You may be combing your hair and a few hairs come out. Any event that you do not accept starts it off, and then your mind is busy for the entire day. Restlessness requires a build-up to which I myself am not a party, and yet the build-up is mine. I do not require. I do not look upon it as different from myself. I see myself fuming and do not know what to do. I have to do something about it because, although I am not a party to it, I am completely involved in it. Why is that? I cannot keep track of this thought by thought build-up. This is because the whole habit of thinking has been noodle thinking, associative or non-directional thinking. It is not peanut thinking, where as in eating peanuts, you take one peanut, then another peanut, and then another. It is all noodle thinking, and in fact is the most common type of thinking. If I were given to give the usual advice, the beginning of thoughts, do not allow this type of thinking to build up. Just nip it in the bud. It would be easier said than done because there is no bud. The thinking first appears as a flower. By the time I become aware of it, it has become a huge jungle. It is not something that buds and can be nipped immediately. The word very beginning of such a thinking is an association of I. Without that, the thoughts would not begin. This mechanical thinking associated as it is with I has no history really. We may see it comes from childhood, that we picked it up from our parents, which means they picked it up from their parents and so on. If that is the case, this kind of thinking has no actual beginning. It is not created at a given time. Because of its association with I, there is no question of my being aware to the first thought because I am taken over at the outset by the thinking itself. I become the very thought. The thought becomes me. Therefore, the advice nip it in the bud is meaningless and can only create a complex such as I cannot nip it in the bud. I don't know how. Such thinking just adds to my build-up of guilt. What then can I do? An occupation for the mind. I can give the mind a meaningful occupation wherein chain thinking is broken. Then the interval that obtains between successive thoughts can reveal a great fact about myself, that I am the silence that obtains between the two thoughts. Logically, we see how restlessness requires a build-up, whereas peace is something very natural for which we do not need to do anything. We do not create peace, we create only restlessness. In japa, you deliberately create a thought because you have a will. You can choose. In this way, you become the author of a given thought. A specific thought is created by you because you chose it. Whereas the silence that ensues is not created by you. In fact, silence is the basis of all thought. Mind as a dancer. In the text Panchadasi, the mind is likened to a dancer on a lighted stage. The dancer portrays a variety of aesthetic sentiments: love, helplessness, anger, cruelty, wonderment, fright. The light on stage builds up the dancer with all of her moods and changes. And when she makes her exit, it lights up the empty stage. The dancer may be performing various dance forms or may not be on the stage at all, yet the light remains uninvolved. It merely illumines. The light itself is not a doer, much less an enjoyer of the dance, nor does it light up the stage as one of its jobs. The nature of light is to illumine, and it illumines. The verb illumines involves no action or motive on part of the light. Therefore, light has no doership. Similarly, when I have a thought, the thought goes away. What remains is silence, which is likened to the empty stage without a dancer. The nature of thought and silence. Absence of thought is generally looked upon as peace, something to be achieved. Thought can be suppressed or negated by certain external means, such as a practice of breath control. When you retain the breath, you cannot think. Nose and try to think. You cannot. Your only thought is to breathe. Here, however, absence of thought, in understanding nature of thought and silence, the whole approach therefore is cognitive. Thought sometimes happens without my sanction, sometimes it happens with my sanction. In japa, thought is deliberate. It occurs with my sanction. And when the thought goes, I understand its absence as the nature of silence. I am silence. What I experience or am aware of between two thoughts is silence. If I see silence after every thought, should I take myself to be the thought or should I take myself to be the silence? Thought by thought or thought arises and thought falls. Before rise of the thought, I am silence. After departure of the thought, I am silence. I am silence first and I am silence last. Thus, in spite of thoughts, I am silence. Thus, in spite of thoughts, I am silence. The practice of japa does not give me this understanding. But by doing japa, I create a situation wherein something that is understood more clearly. In spite of thoughts, I understand that I am silence, nipping thought in its bud. By doing japa, you learn how to nip a thought in its bud. Just as when you see poison ivy, you do not let it grow, so too, by being aware of internal interval between the thoughts, you gain a capacity to nip a thought in its bud. In BMW thinking, you jump from one thought to another. You hold into a second thought and leave the first, and you hold on to the third and leave the second. The lingering content of the first thought connects you to the next thought. This connection causes you to catch second thought and leave the first. Thus, we go from BMW to Germany. Germany takes you to World War II. World War II takes you to Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor takes you to Hawaii. Hawaii takes you to the beach. Beach takes you to melanoma and you become sad. This is how the mind works. If you catch one thought, it means previous one is gone because the two thoughts have nothing to do with each other. That is why we so often lose track of where we began in a conversation. Monkey thinking. The reason we cannot keep track of where we began in a conversation is that we do not hold the wheel. Conversation just takes place. We may start talking about foreign policy and end up discussing sweepstakes. In between, many other topics come up. There is no control. We do not know how it all happened. The flimsier the connections, the more difficult it is to relate one thought to another. I call this type of thinking monkey thinking. The mind being very much like a monkey who leaps from tree to tree. One tree may be an evergreen, the next a maple tree. The monkey just goes from one to the other. Similarly, one's mind jumps from thought to thought and there is no control over ways of one's thinking. In this kind of chain thinking, one cannot arrive at the gap, the interval that exists between thoughts. The chant and the interval. In India, there is a tree called areca tree from which we get betel nut. Like a palm tree, it is very thin and fibrous and tapers at the top. Looking at the tree, you may think it would break if you climbed it, but it will not. A man who goes up one of these trees to gather the small fruits at the top does not need to come down and climb another tree. Instead, by bending the tree with its own body weight, he catches hold of the next tree. In this way, he moves from tree to tree, gathering fruit. Only after picking the fruit from last tree in the garden does he come down. This is exactly what we do in our thinking. From one thought, BMW, you catch Germany, then you catch World War II, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, beach, then you catch melanoma and worry about new mole you have. I'd better consult a doctor. Suppose it's a cancer. How will I be able to handle it? All of these problems started from someone's BMW. This is like walking upon thoughts. you never get to the ground. There is another tree, the coconut tree, that unlike the areca tree cannot be bent without breaking. Thus, a man picking coconuts must return to ground before climbing the next tree. Japa is like this. You get to the ground not after a length of the time, but immediately. You chant. And like coconut tree climbing, you come down. You chant, you come down. Chant, come down. Chant, come down. In this type of chanting, being aware of the interval is as important as the chant because it is the interval that reveals your true nature, silence, awareness.